Hey friends, Greg Kokel here on Stand to Reason, and sorry I wasn't with you live last week. We had an incredible weekend the weekend before last in Minneapolis, 3,800 students, and that was our Minneapolis reality. And you know, we pretty much maxed that church out because when you have almost 4,000 students and you have even 10 breakouts, which I don't even think we have 10 breakouts. That means you have to have rooms that hold at least 400 people each. And things were pretty stuffed in that church just for breakouts. So it was an unbelievable event. I'm not going to go on and on about that, but because we've talked about past ones and new ones coming up next year in February, Dallas, in March, Philly, and in April, Augusta, Georgia. So we'll talk about that more in the future. But I also spent a week in ETS, Evangelical Theological and Philosophical Society, meeting conjointly last week in Denver, and it was great for all of our team to get together, and we hung out together, and we went to papers together and talked with friends and had meals, and it was wonderful. It's one of the few times that we really get to relax together as a team and run ideas past each other and stuff. But anyway, back in the saddle again here, and you need to know, by the way, before I introduce my guest, that I am not, I do not surf the web. I don't watch YouTube programs. Now, there are lots of great ones out there, and my people on our team here, they do all of that. It's just not in my DNA. I'm just an old guy. So I do occasionally watch things, but it generally either related to fishing or woodworking. And so I don't know how. When I was looking at maybe one of those two things, I saw a podcast that Melissa Dougherty had done, and she is one of my favorite interviewers of me. So I've been on her show a number of times, and I don't think she's ever been on mine. So now she is. Melissa, is this your first time on my show?
Yeah, this is kind of surreal because I'm sitting in the very shedio where I very regularly listen to your podcast. Like I'm sitting right
Oh,
over
no
there
kidding.
painting or playing a video game mindlessly, listening to STR and all my podcasts.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of weird to be on this end of it. And yeah, this is the
Uh-huh.
first time I've been on STR and it's a
Well,
total honor. Yeah.
well, we have done a number of things together. I think the very
Hmm.
first time I was on, it was with you and Doreen.
Yeah, it was a while
Doreen
ago.
Virtue.
Yeah.
That was quite a while ago, and then I've
Hmm.
been on your particular show before, your YouTube,
Yeah.
which we'll talk a little bit about. But you are, I really enjoy interacting with you,
Yeah,
and
me too.
you had
It's fun.
so you had a piece that came up, and it was only 9 minutes long. It popped up there, and I think the title line, or at least the thing that grabbed me, is the line that said, "This is probably going to make you angry," or something like that, right? That was a
Yeah.
good grabber.
This might make you
Okay.
mad. Yeah.
Okay, and so then when I opened the piece, the title actually had to do with the number one thing that drove me into false Christianity, and you have a
Hmm.
history in the New Age. But before we get into that little
Hmm.
prolegomena there that sets up what you said, and what
Hmm.
I heard there for 9 minutes, I thought was so good
Mm.
that I wanted you to kind of review that for our own audience, all right? However, I have another question, and that
Sure.
is, I love your attitude on your YouTubes. You're just so energetic, and it reminds me of like someone from New Jersey a little bit. You know, you're just right there, and you want a piece of me kind of thing. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. So I'm curious, where are you from? I don't know that.
Well, it's really funny that you say I'm in New Mexico. And
That's where you live now.
yeah, and it's actually like a really liberal state, but I have to say, like, there's something we call, and I don't mean this in a new age way, but we call it the homie vibe, where everybody out here is just, oh, mijita, let me feed you some enchiladas, and just like come to my house, and everybody just loves each other, and
Uh huh.
everybody's just friends with everybody else, and so it's part of the culture out here, which I really
Yeah.
love. But my dad, on my dad's side, we're Greek, right? And so
Okay.
my yaya came over from Greece in New York. So she landed
Uh
in New
huh.
York, and my dad grew up in Brooklyn. So part of it,
Okay. There it
yeah,
is.
sometimes you guys talk, and especially Frank, I'm like, oh, Yeah, it sounds like my dad. There's a certain
Yeah. When you say
yeah.
Frank, you mean Frank Turek?
Turek, yes, Frank Turek, our
Yeah,
friend.
he's New
Yeah.
Jersey, just so people
Yeah.
know. Yeah, you want a piece of me, kind of thing,
Yeah.
forget about it,
Think
kind of thing. But I actually think that kind of intensity that you have in your own YouTube presence is a lot of fun. It's kind of my
well,
style. I like
thank
that kind
you.
of thing. So, by the way, you live in New Mexico
Yeah.
now. You're not
Yeah.
in Taos, are you?
I'm not no, I'm not in Taos. I've been to Taos though. It's very
No, that's New Age,
yeah.
like capital of the universe
Yes,
almost, right?
Taos and Santa Fe are very new
Uh,
age. And me and my
yeah.
husband went there for our 10-year anniversary. And I'm like, why did you take me here? The apologist in me loved it though, because I wanted to like strike up these conversations with people that I understood, And I
Uh-huh.
remember we went to this, what was it? A ute and an earthship homes that we
Oh,
stayed in. And the woman was very new agey. And I got in this conversation
uh-huh.
with her. And it was really nice, to interact with her. But everybody up there is just on some sort of spiritual pursuit of,
Hmm.
yeah, the new age is very interactive up there.
Well, I'm really glad for the lane that you're in because, we all kind of has, to use Jay Warner's language, we have our unicorn, we have our
Mm-hmm.
lane, and we each do different things to the same end, advancing the kingdom. And there's so many weird things out there now. It's good that we have lots of people addressing these things from a position of experience and knowledge, and that's where you come from with regards to the YouTube. I'm sorry, with regards to the New Age. In fact, on your program, is it just called Melissa Dougherty? Is that, or do you have some other name? No other
No.
handle.
It's
Your
my
name.
name. I
Okay.
never actually set out to do something with YouTube, so I didn't think of anything wittier than just my name. So,
Well, it works. It
yeah,
works. But you have
thanks.
almost 200,000 subscribers, from what I could tell, and you had almost that many. Let's see, 157,000 views of the particular
Hmm.
one that I watched that impressed me. Impressed me in the sense that you are dealing with material that I think the church needs to hear.
Hmm.
Everybody.
Hmm.
And before we get into that, tell us a little bit, just lay a predicate here in terms of your background, New Age, etc., so people have an understanding, more of an understanding of what you were addressing in this shorter piece that I had seen a couple weeks ago.
Sure. Yeah, there's a. I'll give you the short version. Basically, I was saved at 16, and there's no doubt. I had a very radical conversion. It was overnight. I was suicidal. I was not in a good place. I was very, very dark place. And a
Mm,
friend at a party, it was the love of God. He had just gotten saved and he's at this party telling everybody about Jesus. And I just happened to be there and I believed him. And the
mm,
next day I woke up, Greg, and it was like, I remember sitting up in bed and it was like I woke up in a Disney movie. I mean, everything looked different. The sun shone differently. I felt like the
mm,
person I was yesterday was not the same person today. And I'm like, oh, what is this? I like
mm-hmm,
this, and food tasted different, things smelled different, colors look different. I can't even explain it other than that. And the biggest thing, and here's the thing, is that the biggest change that I experienced was this insatiable hunger for more. I want to know the Bible. I want to know more, 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 more. Give me more of this.
mm-hmm.
And that was, I remember turning on the TV and just like trying to actually see. I didn't know anything about, maybe some sketchy TV preachers. I didn't know anything about that. I just wanted to know, where are these people that can tell me more about Jesus? And
So you were in a very unique situation, though, from what I could tell. Correct me if I'm mistaken.
mhm,
That you didn't have a ramp up.
mm,
You kind of heard the gospel, and all of a sudden, bada boom, you're there, and
yep,
it just
give me
total
this.
transformation.
Yes,
Yeah. So
yeah.
it does happen nowadays, but usually it takes a lot longer. Even 50 years ago, when for me, it took me couple of years
Hmm.
of banging things back and forth and ignoring it for a while and pushing away from the table, asking questions, getting into arguments and backing off and finally coming back. So, how long ago was this that you became a Christian?
I
And
was
you said
16.
16. Oh, I don't
Yeah.
want to do math on your age right now, but I just want,
Yeah. And I'm
that's
not
not
going to
what
say
I'm,
I'm that old, but my word, like technology has come a ways. Let's just say that YouTube wasn't around. All right. Like there were still
okay.
like
So,
encyclopedias on my shelf,
uh-huh.
and I remember, and this is where all that wrestling, that knocking around happened for me afterwards because I
Uh-huh.
believed, but then I'm like, okay, but tell me more. I want to know what this is and who this God is. I need to know more about Jesus, and this is important because I grew up in a New Age household and I didn't know that. I grew up
Huh.
in a household that was very open about spirituality, like things like auras, manifesting spirits. I remember being told fantastic spiritual stories growing up, about spirits visiting family members and these things happening that seemed so fantastic to me, but they were
Mm-hmm.
never looked at as bad things. It was always looked at as, oh, it must mean that you're more spiritual, right? So I grew up with this believing that, Jesus was real and things like that, but it wasn't. It was very different when I converted. Like
So I am curious
yeah.
about just that particular event of conversion.
Mm-hmm.
What looked, I don't mean subjectively your response to your conversion, but what was it that seemed different that you heard that changed your mind that resulted in your regeneration? I mean, to put it,
The love
something
of
must
God.
have,
It was the love.
that's what was being communicated.
Yes. So it
Huh.
was by far exactly what I needed to hear.
Hmm.
The what and the why weren't put together though for me at that point, right? So uh, what he was explaining to me was this gospel that I had just never heard like that before. He was talking about, I
Mm-hmm.
remember what he said to me. He pointed to me, and I remember just sitting there. I grabbed a bottle of Strawberry Boone's wine, and I'm sitting and I'm sulking on the couch, and I'm hating myself. Like I'm in a place of self-loathing. And because I had done something that wasn't very good. I've done lots of things, at that point in my life that brought this upon myself, and I'm like, I'm a terrible person. And he's like, you're right, you are. But there's nothing that you've done that God won't forgive. That was just, I don't know why that blew my mind, Greg, but it did. Because the
Oh, what?
way, yeah, well, I mean, you grow up thinking that you're this, that you have this like self divinity, right? And I never really bought into it. I never really understood it very much. I was fascinated
This
with
is what
it.
you're describing, the New Age mindset, the
Yeah,
self
so that
divinity.
was
Yeah.
what was set up for me growing up. And then I
Mm-hmm.
became a Christian, and I think I was really good to go for about 6 months. I went to an independent Baptist church, and there was a Calvary in my city. I think I was probably the happiest summer of my life was my year going into my senior year. I believe it was my senior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was turning 17. I was
It was
like,
so long
it
ago,
was so
right?
long ago. I don't even remember. And here's what started happening is that I remember being very cerebral, and I did not understand at the time why everybody had such a problem with that. I did not understand, like, okay, well, doesn't everybody ask these questions? Somebody hand me a King James Bible, and no, I love the King James, great, but I'm reading it as a 16-year-old in the 21st century, and I'm like, I don't know if I understand what wineskins mean. Like, can somebody explain this
Uh-huh.
to me? And
Mm-hmm.
you're reading this 2,000-year-old Jewish history book in a language that's, not exactly the most relatable. And
Mm-hmm.
I naturally just had questions. And I remember asking a friend so many times. Like, I would go to this one friend in particular, and I would ask these questions. And I remember at one point he was like, "You're making me stumble in my faith. Like, I'm stumbling. You're asking too many questions." And I just did not understand this. And then there was this
Well,
sense,
it sounds like he was asking questions that he had no answers for. And so
yes.
it's almost like now you're suggesting questions I should be thinking about that I have no answers for. And this is
Hmm.
creating doubt in my mind. And so
Yes.
now you're a troublemaker.
Yes.
Sound familiar?
Yes, pretty much it. Like on the nail. Yeah. Nail on the head
Yeah.
there. And it was a struggle because again, we didn't have YouTube. I didn't know what an apologist was. I didn't know anything about, I think at that time the two greatest apologists I think were known were maybe Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel. I didn't know who that was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about that. Nobody even gave them as, resources. It was that whenever I came, especially as a woman, and I had a big gripe about that because it was almost like the church that I went to and the environment that I was in, it was like, that's not your job to ask those questions. And I was just not okay with that. And
Mm-hmm.
what ended up happening was that I started having this. disillusionment almost with church, with Christians. I'm like, you guys are not thinking. And there was something that just turned me off about that. There was an anti-intellectual strain that just turned me off. But what did have the answers was these books on my shelf that I grew up with. They talked about, hell, they talked about evil, they talked about the Bible and Jesus and the gospel. They used all the same Christian terminology. What's the difference? And they were wide open. It's like, Greg, what it reminds me of is, imagine that you're trying to go to a grocery store looking for like bread and milk, right? Like, it's all you need. All you need, give me bread and milk. Can somebody please provide me with bread and milk? And every grocery store that you're going to, you're knocking on the door, asking them like, hey, I see that you have bread and milk in there. Can you please let me in? They're like, no, we're closed. And then you go to this one grocery store, it's wide open. They never close, and they're filled with bread and milk. And they come one, come all, and it's like a Pleasure Island type of grocery store where it's like, yeah, we'll take everyone. It doesn't matter, but we're providing you with what you're looking for.
Yeah, the contrast there between the Christian church, who doesn't give the answers or doesn't even want you to ask the questions,
Yeah.
and another group that says, hey, we love your questions, and we've got our own answers, and we've got a whole bunch of them, and they're fun too, right?
Yes, exactly. And it was, I had so much respect for that because I thought that they were just smarter and more philosophical. Ultimately, it's not very sustainable, though, because the problem is that, not to give it another example after just giving one, but I love this example, but I'm sure you've watched Indiana Jones movies. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I do recall.
All right.
Yes, I am. I think they're great.
I believe it's the Holy Grail. Last Crusade. Yeah, the Last Crusade. There's the end of the movie, and he walks into this cave, and Indiana, there's all these like goblets, right? And he's supposed to choose between all of them, which one's like the authentic one. And you have to actually discern, like, they're not all the same. You have to think, okay, well, that one's pretty, that one's gorgeous. And you assume that they're all made the same, but no, like, there's only one authentic goblet. And it's like you're tasked with figuring out of all of these, which one is the truth. And that's kind of what it is that, oh, well, they're all the same. No, they're not. Like, they'll all kill you, but one. And you're not told that. So I think that's kind of the allure of the New Age, is it doesn't matter what you believe. But ultimately, it leaves you empty with ultimate answers because it relies on the vein of relativism. Like, you can make your own truth. And I don't know. I don't think I got a lot of sustenance out of that. But I ultimately had a lot of questions about the Bible. And I think that's what left me empty overall, was I needed to know these things, and nobody was there to wrestle with me with these things. I needed discipleship is what I needed.
Yeah, well, that reminds me, one of the reasons this is, I think, timely for me to watch your piece and have you on board is because this season of reality, we're doing these conferences for middle schoolers and high schoolers. That's our target. We tell people, of course, we're not taking IDs at the door, so a lot of old-timers show up, which is fine, and youth leaders and parents and et cetera, et cetera. But this year we're focusing our theme on the whole idea of deconstruction and deconversion. And one of the consistent problems that we've seen is that when Christians have questions about that weird book called the Bible, and it's weird in a lot of ways, and especially if you're reading King James Version, because I heard one guy say, it was John Montgomery actually, the theologian and apologist, who said, John Warwick Montgomery, who said, I only use the King James Version with people who are 350 years old or older. Everybody else, I use a more modern translation. But nevertheless, there's a lot of challenging things there. You mentioned 2,000 to 4,000 years of time. There's, you got translation issues, you got cultural issues, you got what the heck is this all about? And a whole bunch of the things that I deal with, and probably you do as well, are people who have just not looked carefully at the text, and because of some of these challenging issues like time and culture and everything, they just misunderstand it and then go off in a crazy direction. And just by going kind of back to the text, never read a Bible verse idea, and then back to some of the sometimes background information that's required, then it begins to fall together in a great, beautiful harmony, and you see this story unfold, this magnificent story of reality, to coin a phrase there, and. And so when kids, young people especially, have questions and they go to their churches and they say, "What's up with this? What's up with that?" And they don't get answers. They get shut down. They get bullied in a certain sense, like you're causing me to stumble, doubt my own convictions. Then what do? Well, they start tuning in to people who said, "Yeah, I asked the same question. I didn't get a good answer because there is no good answer, which is why I'm not a Christian anymore. And so now I'm going that away, and you can come with me." And this is what happens with a lot of people. So
Yeah. Or worse, they tell them what they want to hear. Where there's an element where if you're, like, for example, I have a 12-year-old, and one of the things that I'm having to kind of work through is when your child asks you a question, like, how well do you really know it to explain it to a child? I mean, that's such a challenge. But one of the things that, like, especially youth pastors, she was saying that there was a time where one of the kids was asking questions about homosexuality, and he hummed and hawed over it. Like, he didn't know how to answer it. And I'm like, well, this is something that they should know how to answer. Like, but you answer it honestly. So he gave this, like, really empty answer, really, at the end of the day. And I was kind of disappointed in that, to be honest. And I think that he was just kind of saying, well, I guess it depends on the situation, on this and that. I'm like, it doesn't depend on the situation. It doesn't depend on these certain things. Like, there has to be a solid answer to these things. And I think there's an element where a lot of Christians just want to feel their faith, and they don't want to, like, understand and defend it. And there's an aspect where I don't really agree with that. I don't think that that's okay or correct. And for me in particular, it had a lot to do with the struggle of knowing what I believe and why I believe it. Because, and I mentioned this, I think, in the video, where it's like a comfort to us where we want to shut off our brains and not think about it. And I think that's kind of something that we've fallen too much into. Like, we've gotten too comfortable. And one thing that I talk a lot about, as you mentioned, I think before we got on air, is New Age in the church. But there's another vein to that where we want, like, a lot of experience with God, right? We want to feel God all the time. And the problem with that, and I'm not saying emotions are bad. I think emotions can be they can be a blessing, and they can be good sources of certain truth, I suppose. But if that is your source of truth, you're going to be in trouble, because that's fickle and that changes. And whenever, yeah, keep going.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that we have, like,
oh
no, it's fine.
Later.
You can cut me off whenever you need to.
What I was thinking of was that, because I've thought about this issue a lot, and I tend to be a little bit more left brain.
Me too.
And yeah, so there's a similarity there, but I think the balance is emotions and feelings. They make life beautiful and delicious and all of that, but it is careful thinking about things, reason if you will, that make life safe. And so if what we are opting for is the emotional, mystical kind of thing, that just we want to be overflowing with these emotions, and we opt for that, this can get us into trouble if our emotions are not properly theologically informed, which is a huge thing that you emphasize in your the work that you do, your ministry, and that theologically grounded ideas are, like, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
So you also said something that was really sweet in the piece towards the end of that 9-minute piece, and if people wanted to find that, they can go to Melissa Dougherty on the YouTube to get. Then you have all your things. And I think I just scrolled sideways on those thumbnails, and I saw it fairly quickly. And I saw the thing is, this is probably going to make you mad or something like that.
Yeah.
So that would be the way they find that,
on
right?
YouTube. Yeah, I think I just released it a few weeks ago. And
Yeah.
I think what I thought people would be mad about is that it was other Christians, right? Like, if there was one way to kind of like sum it up and what I thought would make people mad, it was Christians. Like people that would not answer these questions kind of drove me into this other realm of thinking. And I'm like,
Yeah.
so hey guys, kind of putting a stone in your
Right. Well,
shoe.
see, this is yeah. So you're taking a poke at the church, and
Yeah.
the church needs a poke now and again, or a kick in the pants, or whatever. And I think what's really significant here is you're saying your inability to answer my questions and your unwillingness to even try, and even worse, make me feel bad for asking the questions, and I think I got all of those right. That's what made me vulnerable to the false spiritual world of the New Age movement. And then when you embrace that, and they're all totally accepting, and this part of the problem, they accept everybody and everything because the oneness issue is really critical, no division, no judgment, whatever. That sounds really appealing at first, but like you said, I think the way you put it just now and also in your video, it's not sustainable. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that whole New Age movement theology. Though it's attractive in a lot of ways and it appeals to the emotions, the mystical side, etc., it's not sustainable. Tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you think that you're just this wiser, higher spiritual Christian. Like, that's really the best way that I try to describe it. That's usually the way that I describe it. Is that if you were having things happen to you and you were having these experiences, this was God's way of saying that you were on the right path. And that was, the Bible was looked at as like a mystical manual, so to speak, but it wasn't just the only thing that had truth. But here's the problem is that even though I ventured into that, and it's more New Thought than New Age, which can be kind of hashed out on its own, but ultimately the core of the belief is that you're divine. And a lot of people struggle thinking, okay, well, Melissa, how could you call yourself a Christian and believe that? I'm like, I didn't know it wasn't Christian. Like, that's kind of the point, is that you have these teachers that twist. You don't know they're twisting, though. They're quoting scripture. They're talking about Jesus. They're saying this is the gospel. And it sounds so good. But if the only thing that you have to rely on is your 3-pound brain, right, that's your source of truth, that is your way of describing reality, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble when it comes to sustainability of what's true. So what ends up happening is you crave something even more objective to explain, why things are the way they are. And for me, ultimately, it was something that I was looking for after I had my first child. And lo and behold, this is the weirdest thing. God truly does have a sense of humor. It was Jehovah's Witnesses that came to my door. Yeah, and I was in this realm of searching again, where I'm like, well, I kind of still have questions about this. I don't quite understand. I've gotten answers about the Bible, but I don't know. Kind of don't believe it was given to us by aliens, and all these crazy New Age things that came up, and I was still looking for that. And 2 nice Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door, and the internet was 10 years advanced from when I was 16, more advanced, I should say. And about our 3rd visit, I thought a lot of what they believed was a rumor, and it wasn't. And when I discovered, oh, wow, that's what you actually believe, I started researching their religion and simultaneously discovering, oh, if they're wrong, and because of what the Bible says, then I'm wrong because of what the Bible says. And the
light went on.
Yes. And what really did it was when I read something online about the serpent's lie, and I discovered, oh my word, that's what I believed, the serpent's lie, believing and I could be like God. And it unraveled from there. It was okay, give it to me. Like, I need to know what I've gotten myself into. I didn't realize. And the first thing I started to really research is the Bible. I needed to trust that. And at that point, I had discovered, oh, there's this thing called apologetics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really when I started getting into a lot of I got into your stuff. I got into, oh man, a lot of counter cult ministries. And the first thing I really started learning about was cults. And
Mm-hmm.
ironically, it was really strange. Learning about cults really helped me understand why and how people can turn off their brain to certain things.
Mm.
And it helps me see that a lot of it is fear, but they also want to stay true to their tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And this
That's
us
right.
versus, yeah, it's
Mm.
very strange because this is before, even, I don't know, I think Facebook was a thing back then. But I remember getting a smartphone, Greg. I remember getting a smartphone when we think that these are just, they've been around forever. They really haven't. I remember touching the screen and I'm like, oh my word, this is science fiction. And
I thought it was like a magic wand. It's not a
yes,
phone, it's like a magic wand. It does so much. You're right. Science fiction.
yes, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, this is a computer on a screen, and then you have access to the world and the internet and
Mm-hmm.
social media. And what's this gram of Insta? What is this about? And all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff that you now have access to. And I see online this, again, anti intellectual thread, and I don't get
Mm.
it. I think it's really, really
Yeah.
odd that even this
Yeah.
conversation, if somebody were to listen to it, it's almost like you have to make a case for making a case for what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
just don't understand that. I think that
Yeah.
whenever it comes to, when you're told not to think, when you're told just to stay in your lane, like intellectually, stay in your
Mm-hmm.
little tribe or your echo chamber, you are being kind of, you're in my head, it's closer to what a cult would teach. Not that I'm
Yeah.
saying that everybody's, in a cult or anything. I'm saying that that's a mentality that I don't want to be a part of. I think that it's
Mm-hmm.
good to entertain certain thoughts within and certain arguments in the pursuit of truth. Because if you have
Right.
truth, it's going to stand on its own.
In other words, don't be afraid of the challenges or the questions because the truth will out one way or another, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what we want to know. I want to go back to something you said earlier.
Sure.
Francis Schaeffer used to call it semantic mysticism, and what he
Mm.
meant there is how different religious groups are using the same
Yeah.
religious words in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you get this dramatically with LDS, for example, our Mormon friends, and they talk about Christ and Jesus and heaven and God, but they have all different definitions of that. But because of we become vulnerable to that with even groups like the New Age movement, and I talk about this in the Story of Reality, and I use the illustration of the puzzle pieces, making the big picture, and sometimes we get pieces from other puzzles mixed in. And so we've got this kind of Eastern mystical New Age thing, pieces, but some of those pieces look the same. They have the same names. And so you read about in those works like Jesus and being one with God and the kingdom of God is within you, and you see these
Yes.
citations all
Mm-hmm.
over the place in the Bible. But and this is part of what you talked about actually in another piece I watched, and that are what are some of the major New Age teachings in the church. You talk about five of them, but you touched on this issues too. Is there is such shallow understanding of the meanings of these words when they are used by a false religion.
Mm-hmm.
We think that that's actually our story, and it's not an entirely different story.
It's really interesting and funny that you use that analogy. I mean, you're the one who originated with it, but that is exactly how I explain it because I got it from your book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You don't even like watch my stuff or watch a lot of YouTube videos, but I like that analogy so
Occasional
much.
fishing video and woodworking video. That's
Yeah,
all.
exactly. No, and I liked it so much that I even kind of used like a mosaic for my I think for my background. You can't see it right now,
Uh
but
huh.
there's like a for the style of my channel because I'm like, oh, it's like a puzzle piece. Like you're trying to figure, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of
Yeah.
wanted to tell you that played a part,
Well,
and
that's great.
yeah, yeah. No, the mysticism part. I believe that there's actually a book. It's not by Francis Schaeffer, but it is. I think I even have a quote by Francis Schaeffer about mysticism. I don't know where it is on this paper because I have it written up with the top 5 New Age teachings. But yes, the element of when you're reading a teacher and they're talking about Jesus and they're talking about the gospel and they're talking about all these things that sound the same, it is our job to kind of decipher, okay, well, what are they talking about? And I can't remember who it was I was listening to this week, but they were saying that it's really, really important to know the real thing, that you have to know exactly what the Bible teaches, but it's also really important to understand what the counterfeit is. Actually, I think that was Eric Johnson. We were talking about him before we got on about he's an expert in apologetics and witnessing to Mormons. And
Former LDS, right?
yeah, no, I don't think he's former LDS. I think he's,
okay.
he's just an expert in the field.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was on this show, but I wasn't
Yeah.
interviewing. I think Robbie Lasher was doing the interview.
Yeah, I
right?
think that's a common thing he gets, though, is that people believe that he is former LDS. He's not, but I would consider him an expert in it.
Sure.
And he is somebody that I would think would know a great deal about this topic, because Mormons say that they believe the same thing as we do. And Sandra Tanner, she's someone else who's in that ministry, who says if you ever have yourself agreeing with a Mormon, someone hasn't defined their terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
yet,
so
by
it's
the
the
way,
same thing in the New Age.
that what's ironic about the circumstance that you just described is that's clear then that the Mormon doesn't understand his own views.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they want to be subsumed. They've really positioned themselves in the last, I'd say 15 years, especially since you've had major LDS personalities in politics, etc., as a subset of Christianity, which is exactly the opposite of what Joseph Smith was his project. You know, and his idea was, all of you guys are wrong. This has all been a mess. None of these denominations are accurate, and this is why they had to rediscover, as it were, according to their point of view, the true gospel, and that's what justifies their religion. So if Joseph, I agree with Joseph Smith there. It's a different religion, you know. Now, which one is accurate or true, that's another question, and this is what we have to determine from the source material
Exactly.
that is authoritative. And I actually wrote a piece on this in our Solid Ground, oh gosh, it must have been 10 or 12 years ago. And I wasn't even trying to determine which view is correct. That wasn't my purpose. It was just to ask the question, is it fair to say that LDS is a subset of the broader Christian belief? And it turns out, since LDS deny everything that is foundational to historic Christianity, except for Jesus' birth, and I guess the resurrection maybe is one point of kinship, that Jesus rose bodily from the grave, but almost everything else is so completely different. It is an entirely separate religion, and anyway, but people who don't know this, I had people write to us at Stand to Reason, and they were so angry. Or I read pieces on the internet. You narrow-minded people, you're dissing your brothers and sisters in Christ. You know, how dare you owe them an apology? And I realized, this young lady in this particular case had no idea what she was talking about. She didn't know what Mormonism stood for. She didn't know what classical Christianity stood for. All she saw were the same religious words.
Yes. You're exactly right. There's a running joke where you have to convert a Mormon to Mormonism first before you can get anywhere.
Oh, interesting. I
Yeah.
hadn't heard that. That is interesting.
And it's so true, because whenever I got out of the New Age, I mean, I kept visiting with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and you find these online ministries that's all they do. Like, that's their lane.
That's right.
They take them in, they answer questions that are designed to cater to former Jehovah's Witnesses, people asking questions. And then alongside that, it was almost like hand in hand. You had to learn about Mormonism too, because there's so many similarities in these two religions, not in their beliefs, but people coming out of them. And that was something that I learned, is that it's very different experience talking to both of the religions. And also how you have to kind of set up the conversation to understand who you're talking to, and I think that there's an element where whenever you are like, okay, so I think J. Warner Wallace kind of puts this, one of my favorite books he's ever written is Forensic Faith. And this is what it talks about. And I think this is why this is one of my favorite books that he's written, is because he's talking about this. Like, the topic of everything that we're talking about is how to have a forensic faith. And one thing he says, and I'm paraphrasing, is that anybody can say why they believe something. You're going to have, both people can say what they believe is true. Everybody's going to say that what they believe is true. But there's only going to be that person that has an evidence. Like, they're going to be persuasive when challenged. They're going to have some sort of evidential reason. Rationale to believe what they believe. And it doesn't matter what your feelings say after that. I mean, here's the evidence. And that's what spoke to me. Because I'm like, man, some days I wake up and I don't like the problem of evil. I wake up and I don't understand some things in the Bible. I don't understand. Like, I was sick this weekend. I mean, I don't know if we all can hear it, but all I kept thinking about was, man, I have a comfortable bed. I have food in my fridge. I have things like creature comforts while I'm sick. And I can't imagine somebody, that's maybe sick. They have nobody. They're suffering. All I could think about was that, as weird as that sounds, but that's where my mind goes because my brain never shuts off. But the evidence, you know what I mean? It's like right. There's this little dance that I do almost all the time. And I'm sure you understand that at the end of the day, my feelings will always fail me. And it's more than just feelings. It's kind of going with what you feel will make you feel better. And that was another allure into the New Age, was the problem of evil, is how do you deal with that? Well, it's subjective. Oh, that makes me feel so good. Is it true? I don't know. But that makes me feel good. And
in a moment, or for a moment.
And that was my answer was subjective reality and subjective evil.
Question though, isn't there some aspects of it depends on who you talk to in New Age, but if you are God, which is central to the whole New Age movement, in some sense you are God, then you are the one who's responsible for whatever evil befalls you. If you're making your reality, you have no one to blame but yourself. I mean, that's the price to pay for being God, right?
Yes.
And so that, on the one hand, we're all God, you are God, and this sounds so great until, if you think of it in a Hindu sense, that just means that you don't even exist, that God is all that exists, and you're just God's imagination, so to speak, Maya, you know. Well, that's not very uplifting. Well, but then if you take it the other side, I am really God, I'm the divine essence, I am making decisions, creating my own reality. Well, then whatever reality you're in is what you made. So you kind of get hit from the other side, right?
Yeah, I think you kind of put that better than I could have. There's this paradox, this strange problem that New Agers have. And this is why when it comes to critical thinking, there's a limit. And I'm sorry if you can hear the neighbor's dog barking, just FYI. There's this limit.
That wasn't your stomach growling or anything. Yeah,
no, actually.
Thank you for the clarification.
I am a Greek girl, though. So, I mean, I'm always hungry. So there's that. But no, you're exactly right. Like you pinned it up. There's this problem. And, people think, it's like, you're God. But, I mean, if you're going to get real technical, it's panentheism, which is a lot of what New Agers believe in, which is different than pantheism. Pantheistic God is all is God. Panentheism is more like what Richard Rohr believes, which is you become what, in this sense, what Jesus was. You become divine like he was. Therefore, you can do the things he did and have the mind of God. And then you can... bring yourself to that godlike status, that enlightenment, if you will. But you're exactly right, because you still have the problem of, okay, well, what do you do about evil then? Like, you're still dealing with this problem of things coming into your reality that ultimately is your fault. And you have to kind of think about that and wonder, if you are in control of that, that's not a good thing. If you're your own sovereign, there's a limit to what you can not take credit for. And I don't think people think about it that far. I think that there's an element there where it's not a good thing to be God.
Well, this isn't my field. You do the deep dive, but that's kind of how I characterize it a little bit in a chapter in the story of reality, because this is an alternate story. If you have, in our story, you have mind and matter, you have immaterial world and a material world, you have God, immaterial, making the rest of the world that includes immaterial things. Well, we got both. Then you got the materialist, the atheist, that says there's only one thing and it's all matter. And then you have the kind of Eastern religion style, it's only one thing and it's all mind. And New Age kind of falls loosely in that second category, it seems to me, but with its own nuances and everything else. So you in another piece I watched that I made reference to a few moments ago, what are some of the major New Age teachings that you find in the church? You mentioned 5 things. I'm looking at my clock. We got like 11 minutes or 12 minutes. Can you
I'll go over my
very
favorites.
briefly,
Yeah.
because I know that you do entire presentations on these things, and one thing I appreciated in a footnote that you added to that particular piece is you were saying, look, I'm not trying to refute all of these things I'm just telling you what these things are. I've spent more time doing that in longer pieces about these different characteristic things we find in the church, which, by the way, I thought was, I liked that because you're acknowledging I am doing this and I'm not doing that. And if you think that me just complaining about these things is a refutation of those things, I know the difference. So
Yeah.
I thought that was very insightful.
Thank
Could
you.
you touch on some of those things that you see in the church that are problematic? And by the way, you did do this number with Bethel. I know I'm talking about you, Bethel, and you said I'm watching you, kind of
I
thing.
am.
Yeah,
I
that
am
was
still watching
so.
them. I think
This whole
a book that you would like, Greg, is Holly Pivick and Doug. I don't know how to say his last name.
Guyvet, and
Yes, okay,
I had
yeah.
lunch with Doug Guyvet about 2 days ago,
Oh,
actually.
goodness. Oh, man. Are we like,
But this is that ETS. But
we have
no,
like the
they
same
have
brain.
actually we had them on for their first book, and their new book
good.
is just out, and it's
Yes.
doing well, and they're scheduled for an interview. I think Doug will be doing the interview.
Then that's half my
Yeah,
work done for me. I think
Yes.
that you already know what I'm getting at because they have done a lot of work on that.
New Apostolic Reformation.
Yes.
Bethel is a big church in Northern California that is a kind of the mecca for that kind of thinking, and it's a very diverse set of religious views that allows a lot of them to dodge criticism. Well, that's not my view; that's his view, kind of thing. But there is a body of similar beliefs. I think it's a confused Christology, not Christology, but ecclesiology. A
yes.
confused understanding of what the church is and how
And
it
an
functions.
over-realized eschatology. A lot of it hinges on their eschatology.
So instead of going into NAR,
Yeah.
we'll talk about the, because we'll do that later, but there is a kinship between these, and that was
Yes.
why you made that comment.
Yes, and they have a whole
in the
chapter in their
piece.
book about it. I just got done with it, and I'll probably say the 2 that I think are the most prevalent right now that I think people would recognize the most. And first one is the law of attraction, which I have a whole video about the Word of Faith movement, which is the prosperity gospel, and the law of attraction and the similarities, and it is uncanny. I didn't hear any. I heard these teachings in the New Age on a pulpit before I even knew, it was before I even understood that it was a New Age concept. In other words, right?
You heard it in the church first.
I heard it from people. I'm just going to name names, just going to be real. Like Joel Osteen. And I'm not even
Your
like
best
saying,
life now.
yeah, I'm not even saying anything.
Which, by the way, my reflection on that is he's right. It is, this life is his best life because it's all downhill after this one, right?
It's
kind of
that's just
the dark
a
reflection,
blanket.
but it's true.
It's just a fact. That is just something I used to listen to him all the time in the New Age. I didn't know that. I thought he was teaching law of attraction. I was like, oh, this is great. Like, you're having like this mix of Christianity. This guy gets it.
Explain to our listeners what that is if
Okay.
they don't know it by that term.
Law of attraction was probably the number one thing that I was into in the New Age, and I was trying to attract a spirit guide, I remember, which I had a very terribly hard time doing, which I think I understand why. I'm so glad that never happened. But the law of attraction basically is supposedly a universal law that like energy attracts like energy. So if everything's energetic and vibration, what vibration and energy I am is what the universe will bring back to me, so to speak. And there's a lot more to say about it, but it has a lot to do with your words. And I want you to think about like the word of faith, prosperity, teaching about proclamation, which is literally whatever you speak. And the
Confession,
yes,
confessing these things. I don't mean confessing of sin.
You're
It's
exactly
confessing
right.
what you want. Yeah.
Yes, confession, proclamation. It's you are telling God what you want to come into your life. And what's uncanny to me and what I thought was so interesting is they use Matthew 7:7 as like the formula, Greg, for the law of attraction. And prosperity preachers use the same thing. And I have a bread
What is that
trail.
passage?
What's that? Oh, ask.
Tell us what it says.
It's ask, believe, and receive, basically.
Oh,
If
yeah,
you
right.
ask and you don't have any doubts, you ask with all your heart and you believe with all your heart, then you must receive what it is that you are asking for. And a lot of it has to do with your speaking and not doubting your faith. And
So
so
if,
if
for
you
example, you don't receive healing,
yeah, exactly. I
that's
was
your
just going to say
fault.
that. Yes, exactly.
Okay, sorry.
You ultimately have, nobody will ever say that like to your face, but ultimately that is the implication that you are stuck with is that it is your responsibility to bring that healing based on your faith. And if you don't have enough faith, then there's something wrong with the person that prayed for you, or there's something wrong with you and your faith. And the law of attraction works very similarly. If anybody's listening has been anywhere like even slightly exposed to the law of attraction, you will see the parallels in word of faith churches. And the second one that really
Wait, before
I
you go to the second
sure
one,
sure
let
yeah
me just jump. I want to jump in with a question. We still got 6 minutes, so we'll
sure
give you
sure
a chance on the second one.
sure
But I'm just wondering, you mentioned some very obvious word faith people, and we've got a lot of names others can think of in this clearly non-biblical thing. I'm wondering, though, how much or in what ways that you've seen that concept has kind of snuck into evangelicalism, and otherwise well-meaning and otherwise sound teachers. You don't have to name names at this particular point, but are there some habits or ways that we talk about it that really reflect more of that idea than a biblical view? I mean,
yeah
does this influence how we understand how God answers our prayers, or I'm just wondering about kind of that application.
yeah I would have to
And
say
maybe you haven't
that
thought about that. I don't know.
no, I have. What I'm thinking of is how to say it. So another element where I kind of go into more detail about this is like what I would call like a megachurch culture. And I want to be really careful about this because I think that there's wonderful megachurches out there. I think that there
Right.
are bigger churches that have a clear gospel. I think they have great discipleship. And I think that the pastors are great and everything that they are exegetically teaching from the pulpit is good. What I'm talking about is this megachurch culture of not necessarily like a name it and claim it, because that would be more prosperity gospel oriented. I'm talking about a culture of positivity, of don't think negative, of like a what is it called? Oh, like a Jesus calling type devotional ish, where I believe it's Elizabeth Bonewitz has in her curriculum, she has a triangle for the kids to look at, and it's hands, heart, what is it? Hands, heart, and head, right? And she's like, you got to have an equal element of all three of these things. But what I'm explaining to my kids is that there's a lot of heart and there's a lot of hands, but they don't have a lot of head. And I think in that aspect, what we do and what we tend to do is focus only on those verses that speak positive things, because whenever you
Right.
speak positive things, those things will manifest in your life. This is the kind of attitude God wants you to have. And then what ends up happening is that you become sympathetic to these teachings that are more new age in origin than they are biblical. And you have teachers who call themselves Christians, like, let's see, you have Brene Brown, you have Glennon Doyle, you have progressives who teeter that line, which I call progressive Christianity the stepsister of New Age, because they're very intertwined and you don't know the difference. So in that way, you have this New Age progressivism, so to speak, that is in every church. And I call it like a megachurch culture, because the goal in a lot of bigger churches is numbers and not necessarily discipleship. And I
Right,
think
right,
that
right.
I think
It's
that
consumer driven than
yes,
truth driven. Yeah.
and they even have a
I'm looking.
marketing way to do it. So that's where
Yeah.
I'd have gripes.
So I pulled you off your topic. You were going to give me. You were really excited about number two. Thanks for that. Answering my question, but we got like a minute and a half now. Do you want to just say your number two one that you're really concerned about?
Mysticism. And I need to be really clear about mysticism because I think mysticism can be misconstrued and misunderstood as something that's always bad. It's not. I think Christian mystics are people that just simply believe in supernatural. Like the word can mean different things, so I need to define that term.
Right,
But
right.
what I mean, and I have a whole video on this if people want to check it out, is a lust for the supernatural. All they want is experience with God, and this is my gripe with Bethel. Is that if
Yeah.
you're not having constant experiences and feelings with God, then you're not as spiritual. And so that's
Yeah.
like the 30-second,
Thumbnail
little,
sketch there.
the
No, well, I'm
summary
with you
of
on.
that.
I I share that concern. We talk a lot about, and I think this falls into this category about hearing the voice of God and just whole motifs of decision making where God is dropping little hints here and there, and that's that supernatural thing that's happening just for me, and therefore there's a sense of intimacy this creates and a sense of closeness to God and realness and personableness with God, but unless these things are clearly evidenced in Scripture as appropriate for standard Christian living, well, then we're talking about something that's just not biblical. Feel like we could go for a whole nother hour, Melissa.
We only
Thank
went
you
for an
so much.
hour.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. And
Yeah, same.
if you want to go to our YouTube, it's Melissa Dougherty, Dougherty, the Greek girl who knows a few things that will help you, especially in New Age, but all the things that just what I've seen so far has been stuff had broader application. Know Your Bibles was the ending of that
Yeah.
session that you had.
The remedy.
The remedy, very simple. Just get it right, and you won't be taken down this primrose path. Thank you so much, Melissa. Look forward to our next chat.
Yeah. It was an honor, Greg. Thank you.
On my show or yours.
Yeah, ditto.
All right, friends, that's it for our show. There's our music, and Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. You give them heaven. All right? Bye-bye now.